Highbridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Thanks for Your Service: The Causes and Consequences of Public Confidence in the U.S. Military. By Peter D. Feaver. Read by Lee Goettl. Publisher's Note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to figures and tables present in the print and e-book formats of the book. Chapter 1. Introduction. This reverent but disengaged attitude toward the military — we love the troops, but we'd rather not think about them — has become so familiar that we assume it is the American norm. James Fallows, 2015. This book is about high levels of confidence in the armed forces of the United States, as expressed by the American public over the last several decades. What explains this confidence? Does having a high level of confidence in the military matter for anything else of importance? And, more speculatively, what do answers to those questions suggest about the future trajectory of public attitudes toward the military? The answers offered in this book draw on proprietary survey data collected expressly to probe these questions and can be summarized briefly. Public confidence in the military is heavily shaped by what may be called the Smith-Barney factor, recalling the old television advertisement for Smith-Barney Wealth Management. They make money the old-fashioned way. They earn it. That is, part of public confidence in the military is this old-fashioned way, in which the military earns it with high competence, adherence to high professional ethics, and a determination to stand apart from the bitter divisions of partisan politics. As the analyses in this book show, that is undoubtedly part of the story, and it suggests that if the military stops earning it, if the military performance slips, if the public sees the military falling short of ethical standards, and if the military joins the partisan food fight, then public confidence will drop accordingly. However, a central finding in this book is that public confidence has been propped up by other factors as well, ones that do not fit neatly within this comfortable story of complete deservedness. Importantly, public confidence in the military already is shaped by partisan considerations, in particular, a blame game, in which the military is at least a passive participant, and by social desirability bias, the idea that some individuals express confidence in the military because they believe that is the socially approved attitude to hold. This suggests that the still high confidence the military enjoys today could well be more tenuous than a superficial glance at poll numbers might suggest. It is worth preserving the public's high confidence in the military, if deserved, because high confidence reinforces other attitudes of interest, including support for raising and maintaining the defense forces the country needs, and support for using the military to defend important national interests. High confidence is not an unalloyed benefit, however, since it can lead to a desire to use the military in the service of policies for which the military tool may not be well suited. Even more problematically, high confidence does not bring with it an understanding of, nor support for, the best practices in democratic civil-military relations, and can even lead to situations where the military is put on a pedestal, from which it might look down on civilian society. This perch might also offer some unwelcome insulation from accountability for its performance when such accountability devolves into a partisan blame game. To break this down a bit more concretely, the American public has confidence in the military because of 6 primary drivers: patriotism, performance, professional ethics, party, personal contact, and public pressure. There is no guarantee this public confidence will remain elevated, however, and trends in these underlying drivers are uncertain and impermanent. Even in retrospect, these trends can be difficult to identify precisely, in part, the lack of detailed, precise data about the drivers of public confidence in the military, beyond the top-line confidence ratings that Gallup, the National Opinion Research Center, NORC, and the General Social Survey have collected in recent decades, is a major reason why these new surveys provide real value. Whenever possible, though, I do trace broad trends across a number of different longitudinal data sources to reinforce that the proprietary surveys offer not only a glimpse, but also a deeper understanding of why confidence increased in recent decades. Of particular importance, surveys conducted after the ones that are the focus of this book largely reinforce the main arguments presented here. Regarding the specific drivers I identify, high levels of public confidence seem to be partly an artifact of the indefinite quasi-war footing the country has been on since late in the Cold War, and the patriotic ceremony that has come with it, patriotism. Periodic high-profile uses of the military, Desert Storm, the Kosovo War, and especially the myriad interventions after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, have all made the military salient in the public's mind. And while those interventions have yielded uncertain strategic results in geopolitical terms, the public has judged the military's performance in those operations quite favorably. Performance. When the public has identified shortcomings, it has not attributed them to failures in the military, but rather to defects in the civilian political leadership of the wars. Yet it seems clear that the public has confidence in the military in part because it believes the military holds itself to a high ethical standard, professional ethics. These attitudes have been heavily conditioned on partisanship, with Republicans showing much higher levels of confidence, higher estimations of performance and ethics, and greater willingness to shield the military from blame than Democrats, party. These attitudes also reflect a marked degree of what social psychologists call social desirability bias, what is colloquially understood as something like political correctness. A significant portion of the public appears to express high levels of confidence primarily because that seems to be the socially approved opinion, public pressure. To a certain extent, social connection and familiarity with the military boosts confidence, though not uniformly so. Having a direct connection to the military props up confidence, but having no connection leaves attitudes somewhat unmoored, personal contact. The surveys show that confidence does move up or down in mostly intuitive ways when they present respondents with information intended to nudge their opinions up or down. Information that frames the military as incompetent or unethical leads respondents on average to have somewhat lower levels of confidence, performance, and professional ethics. Likewise, being told that the military is a political supporter of the opposing party leads partisans to lower their level of confidence in the military, whereas being told that the military supports one's own party does not, party. The public does not want a partisan military, but seems to define partisan down to mean only aligns with the party opposite my own. Regarding the effects, high levels of confidence obviously provide the military with the intrinsic utility that any institution might derive from being viewed favorably. When confidence declines in response to adverse information about the military, it has the potential to affect public attitudes to the military across the board. Thus, hearing about questionable ethical behavior by the military lowers estimations that the military is truthful and thereby lowers overall confidence in the military. But awareness of unethical behavior also lowers estimations of the competence of the military and its ability to win the wars it fights. In other words, the public seems not to worry about partisan, unethical, or dishonest behavior just because people see those things as bad in and of themselves. Rather, they worry that such behavior shows that the military will not be able to do its job well and that it does not share their values. But beyond that, these results suggest that military leaders are wise to care about maintaining the public's confidence because along with it come other tangible and intangible benefits. High confidence is correlated with support for higher defense expenditures and a willingness to recommend to others that they join the military. In an era when the Department of Defense faces tough fiscal choices and must scramble to attract the highly qualified recruits on which military strength depends, it is surely a significant boon that the public views the military so favorably. Likewise, high public confidence helps contribute to a permissive environment for the use of the military in support of foreign policy objectives. Whether this is a boon or a bane depends on one's own opinions regarding the utility of military force, but it surely gives policymakers more latitude than they would have if they faced implacable skepticism from the public regarding what the military can or should accomplish. High levels of public confidence also appear to contribute to an environment in which the military enjoys perquisites and prerogatives unlike any other institution in American public life. Here, as explained in much greater detail in Chapter 10, the ultimate consequences are more ambivalent, since it is not at all clear that being put on a pedestal in this fashion is conducive to healthy civil-military relations in a democratic republic. but it seems clear that this confidence has insulated the military from criticism that it might otherwise have received. More troublingly, it seems clear that the high confidence has become associated with some of the more pernicious developments in American political life, particularly intense partisan polarization. Although the analysis here should provide greater insight into what factors to watch going forward, I am less confident in predicting the future course of public attitudes. After all, one of the motivations for the present study was the fact that public confidence had remained persistently high despite signs of its fragility that were noticeable some 2 decades ago. Betting against the public's admiration for the military has been something of a fool's game for a long time, and yet it is impossible not to notice the warning signs in the details presented throughout this book. To the extent that high public confidence in the military is an artifact of salient combat operations, if the gradual decline in high-intensity combat interventions over the past half-decade extends into the future, then some decrement in public attitudes should follow regardless. Moreover, just as partisan polarization has poisoned public attitudes across a wide spectrum of government activities, it seems unlikely that the military can avoid experiencing a similar corrosion if present trends continue. It is striking just how prominent the military was in the public's imagination during the extraordinarily divisive 2020 presidential campaign and its aftermath. Although military leaders worked hard, and with some success, to keep the institution out of playing a pivotal role in the drama, they could not keep the military out of the limelight altogether. By the time President Biden's administration was securely launched, the military could not completely escape the tarnish that stained virtually every political actor in the tragedy. It is also not clear how long attitudes that are based on a social connection to the military can remain robust as demographic trends lead inexorably to a smaller and smaller percentage of Americans having direct ties to the military. At the same time, senior military leaders rightly care about what the public thinks about the organizations they lead, and have it within their power to make reforms that might help shore up public confidence. As discussed in the concluding chapter, a military that is assiduous about being competent, ethical, and uninvolved in partisan politics is more likely to be seen in that way, and that should help shore up public confidence in the face of other downward pressures. Plan of the book. The chapters that follow analyze a raft of data to reach these conclusions. In this chapter, I lay out a bit more of the background of the questions I seek to answer and sketch out what answers prevailed before this study was launched. The main body of the book is broken into 3 sections. Part 1, comprising chapters 2 and 3, considers public attitudes about the military in general and shows how those attitudes vary across key demographic groups. Chapter 2 examines the changes in public confidence over time, drawing on the General Social Survey and, to a lesser degree, the Gallup Survey, which together have tracked this issue since the early 1970s. Chapter 2 also conducts a detailed analysis of a snapshot of American opinion in 2019 and 2020, exploring how this basic confidence question varies by the political affiliation and ideology of the respondent, as well as by other standard demographic factors that are important in public opinion research, and assessing the extent to which the public draws much of a distinction between the active duty force as a whole versus prominent military leaders, the individual military services, retired generals and admirals, and veterans. Chapter 3 examines how attitudes about the military co-vary with how well a respondent knows the military, the respondent's base of information on military matters, the media channels by which the respondent gets information about the military, the respondent's education level, and the degree to which respondents have some social or personal connection to the military. The next major section of the book, Part 2, comprised of chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7, goes beyond simple demographics to consider other reasons why the public holds the level of confidence in the military that it professes to hold. Chapter 4 compares confidence in the military to confidence in other public institutions and begins to explore why public confidence in the military surged, even as it dropped among other national institutions. Chapter 5 uses survey experiments to test various hypotheses for why the public might believe the military is worthy of high confidence, including basic arguments about the military's competence or professionalism. Chapter 6 uses similar techniques to dig into how confidence is shaped by the perceived politicization of the military. Chapter 7 uses other techniques to explore the extent to which public confidence is a function of social desirability bias. The final section, Part 3, probes why confidence in the military matters and what we can do about it. Chapter 8 examines the extent to which confidence in the military seems to matter for the tangible needs of the military, budget and manpower. Chapter 9 examines how confidence is linked to views about military force as an instrument of foreign policy. Chapter 10 digs into the intangible benefits that come with high confidence and social esteem. Chapter 11 closes the book with a discussion of how policymakers can best make use of the arguments I advance. Throughout, the book rests heavily on proprietary data collected for this project by NORC. A technical appendix available online, dataverse.harvard.edu/dataverse/p-fever, describes the data collection in much greater detail, but in brief, the process consisted of 2 waves of surveys, one in the early summer of 2019 and one in the early fall of 2020. NORC surveyed some 4,500 American adult respondents each time, with a large oversample of some 900 veterans to allow for more precise comparisons across veteran and non-veteran groups. Each respondent received an internet-based survey instrument that took roughly 15 minutes to complete. With the publication of this book, these responses are now available for anyone to use and are also at dataverse.harvard.edu/dataverse/p-fever. They comprise some of the most detailed and up-to-date survey data on American public attitudes to the military ever collected. Background. During his State of the Union address in 2012, President Barack Obama highlighted the killing of Osama bin Laden and the then recent, but short-lived, removal of U.S. troops from Iraq before directing his praise to the men and women who carried out his orders. Obama stated, "These achievements are a testament to the courage, selflessness, and teamwork of America's armed forces. At a time when too many of our institutions have let us down, they exceed all expectations. They're not consumed with personal ambition. They don't obsess over their differences. They focus on the mission at hand. They work together." The president paused for a moment and then concluded, "Imagine what we could accomplish if we followed their example." In a rare moment of bipartisan unity, legislators on both sides of the aisle sprung to their feet and delivered the longest sustained applause of the night. That an American president would praise the bravery of American service members is not surprising. The U.S. public's high-professed confidence in the military is an oft-quoted statistic. But, in a democracy with a strong tradition of civilian control of a military, it was nonetheless striking to see a progressive Democrat calling for the American people and their political institutions to become more like the military. In praising the military, Obama was trying to invoke things on which Americans might agree: love of mom, apple pie, and the military. He was reminding Americans of what they already knew, which is that most other Americans hold the military in high esteem. Indeed, the public's generally high esteem for the military is one of the facts about American public opinion that most Americans seem to know. Put another way, public confidence in the military may be something of a mystery, but it is certainly not a secret. The result is trumpeted repeatedly after it is reconfirmed in new polls, and anecdotally, I have found that it is all but impossible to have a conversation about civil-military relations with military or political leaders for very long without the interlocutor providing the statistic unprompted. Part of its salience is due to the fact that very few other public institutions in the United States enjoy such standing. In 2022, according to Gallup, the military was one of only 2 institutions in which a near supermajority of the public, 64%, had a great deal, 32%, or quite a lot, 32%, of confidence. Not the church, Congress, the Supreme Court, or the presidency. Not organized labor or big business. Not public schools or the medical system or HMOs. Not newspapers or television news or news on the internet. and not the criminal justice system or the police. Only small businesses at 68% enjoyed comparable levels of confidence, split evenly between a great deal and quite a lot. Increasingly, it seems, support for the military may be one of the few things on which Americans can agree in these polarized times. Part of its salience may also be due to the fact that it was not always so, that as recently as the post-Vietnam era, the military was held in much lower esteem, 25% a great deal, and 29% quite a lot of confidence. And indeed, for much of U.S. history, the military was viewed with some suspicion, especially during peacetime. These two factors work in tandem to make the military stand out. While Americans lost confidence in other institutions over the last several decades, public confidence in the military bucked the trend and actually increased. And, of course, part of the salience of the statistic is that the military as an institution is itself quite salient in American public life. The military plays a central role in American foreign and national security policy, and rising prospects of a military confrontation are the fastest way that a problem becomes a crisis that commands public attention. More distinctively, the military occupies a privileged position in the public consciousness, whether in the form of popular film and television productions, or the quasi-ritualistic role the military plays at sporting and other major civic events, or even in the regular reminders for airline travelers that the military qualify for the special benefit of early boarding on planes. To be sure, some of the most salient manifestations are symbolic, sporting events, or even fantasy, Hollywood, which makes the interaction of the average citizen today with the military qualitatively different from the way it was at the height of the Vietnam War, let alone the mass mobilization of World War II and the Civil War. The military is not ubiquitous, as it was during the age of total mobilization, and fewer Americans have a personal connection to it. Yet, if you compare the present day to the pre-Civil War era, or the 1870 to 1910 era, outside of the brief Reconstruction period, or even the post-Vietnam malaise era, then the U.S. military is more prominent. America's global geopolitics makes the military relevant and salient in a real way, and not just a fantasy way, that the framers of the Constitution would have found disconcerting. In short, the military is hard to ignore altogether in American culture. For all these reasons, most Americans know that most other Americans have high confidence in the military. In my survey, some 70% agreed, or strongly agreed, that most members of American society have confidence in the military. What is less well understood is why this is true. Findings from earlier work. This book is by no means the first effort to understand the dynamics of public confidence in the military. The public's on-again, off-again affair with the military has long interested historians. King and Carabel is perhaps the most comprehensive examination of the question using the tools of social science until this work. I explored a detailed snapshot of data from early in the Cold War, and more recently, Burbach has sought to bring that earlier work up to the contemporary era, extending the earlier analyses up to 2016. All of these efforts contributed to the baseline understanding of the dynamics of public confidence and undergirded the expectations I sought to test with the new data collected. The key findings from other studies include the following. Public confidence, especially when focusing on respondents who select the strongest response option, a great deal, has moved up and down in response to world events, but remained remarkably and consistently high for decades. There are at least 3 plausible and potentially complementary explanations for this persistent high public confidence. Perhaps the military is very good at what it does. Perhaps the military exhibits a high level of ethical standards. And perhaps the military's advertising efforts, designed to draw in recruits, have persuaded the public to rate the military highly. Perceptions of battlefield prowess are probably part of the story, since public confidence climbs somewhat in the wake of good news from the front and dips somewhat when the wars are going poorly. But it is not all of the story. The same public that expresses confidence also believes the United States has been losing the wars the military is fighting. Perceptions of high military ethics and the positive effects of recruiting efforts are also probably part of the story, since the public does tend to believe good things about military ethics, but it is not clear how much this props up confidence. The aggregate poll result masks important, if intuitive, variation among subpopulations. Men show higher confidence than women, whites more than non-whites, older people more than younger, people with personal or social connections more than those with none. Perhaps of greater significance, public confidence seems highly conditioned on partisanship. Today, Republicans have much higher confidence than Democrats or independents, but in the late 1970s, the reverse was true. Unlike most other issues on a traditional left-right scale, independents do not fall in between Republicans and Democrats. However, partisans of either stripe have more confidence than self-identified independents. Strongly partisan Democrats condition their confidence on whether the president is a Democrat, producing higher confidence, or a Republican, producing lower confidence. There is some evidence that the public feels social pressure to express pro-military attitudes. Support for increased spending on veterans' benefits might be 10 points higher than the true underlying level of support overall, perhaps 25 points higher among African Americans. Some of the earlier arguments have been harder to maintain, as public confidence in the military has remained high, while the underlying conditions have changed markedly. Early research suggested that increased public confidence was partly a function of whether the public viewed an institution as above partisan politics. Institutions that the public viewed as nonpartisan, like the military and the Supreme Court, fared better in polling than did institutions that the public viewed as unavoidably partisan, like Congress or the presidency. According to this theory, the drop in public confidence in the Supreme Court, dropping from a high of 50% in 1997, saying that they have a great deal or quite a lot of confidence, to a low of 30% in 2014, coincided with the changing perception of the Supreme Court as a non-political legal body, seemingly above partisan politics, into something that looked more like 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and one less predictable, perhaps even confused, individual. Confounding this explanation, however, is evidence that the military, especially the officer corps, has also become more partisan, and that the public has become increasingly aware of these changes. And yet public confidence in the military has not declined proportionately. Furthermore, in lieu of an overall decline in confidence driven by dismay over rising partisanship, there is evidence of a growing confidence gap, perhaps driven by rising partisanship in the general public. Liebert and Golby demonstrate that a large confidence gap has developed since the mid-1970s, with Republicans now far more likely to express confidence than either Democrats or independents. Burbach suggests that the party of the president also may impact partisans' assessments of the military. King and Karabel also argued that increased public confidence reflected underlying changes in views about the competence of the military compared to other institutions, partly due to better performance and partly due to better public relations. After the Vietnam War, the military implemented reforms that helped it rebuild itself as an institution, but it also rebuilt its relationship with the press and, perhaps more importantly, with Hollywood. The Department of Defense partnered with television and movie studios on high-budget films, like Top Gun, that portrayed the military in a very positive light. As a result of changes in both competence and persuasion, the U.S. military seemed good at what it was supposed to do, fight and win the nation's wars, whereas Congress and other institutions simply appeared dysfunctional. After nearly 2 decades of prolonged wars with a disastrous outcome in Afghanistan, and at best, an unsatisfying outcome in Iraq, however, the suggestion that perceptions of military competence are driving high military confidence deserves greater scrutiny. Moreover, the media landscape has also undergone fundamental changes over the last 2 decades, with the advent of the Internet and the introduction of streaming services. Even if King and Karabel, 2003, were correct that increased confidence among millennials, driven largely by their exposure to positive portrayals of the U.S. military on television and in the movies, was the driving factor behind increased military confidence, that explanation is on much flimsier ground today. Collectively, the existing literature leaves unresolved many questions related to the causes.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?